How to apply the OCAF. Welcome to the Public Housing Repositioning Post-Closing How-To video series. The goal of the video series is to help explain and discuss common issues and activities that occur post-repositioning and help PHAs understand their asset management and reporting responsibilities in the project-based voucher, PBV for short, program following a RAD conversion, and other repositioning actions leading to PBV. Each video within the series provides quick guidance, approximately 10 minutes. This video specifically addresses a common issue that occurs after a rental assistance demonstration, RAD conversion, or post-RAD for short. This video walks you through how to apply the Operating Cost Adjustment Factor, or OCAF for short, to adjust contract rents for RAD PBV units. Please remember, rent adjustments on traditional PBV units follow traditional PBV program rules. Please refer to 24 CFR 983.302(b)(2). What is the OCAF? So, what is the OCAF, or Operating Cost Adjustment Factor? Let's start with the basics. 1. Who sets the OCAF? HUD calculates and publishes the OCAF annually in the Federal Register. The Federal Register notice states when the OCAF for a given year takes effect, which is typically February 11th. 2. What does the OCAF effective date mean? This means that if the 2021 OCAF becomes effective on February 11th, 2021, the Housing Assistance Payment, or HAP, contract with an anniversary date on January 1st or February 1st of 2021 will use the OCAF for the prior year, i.e. 2020 OCAF. 3. What does the OCAF do to rents? The OCAF is a factor that is applied to adjust existing contract rents, less the portion of rent that is paid for debt service. In other words, it is intended to adjust the portion of the rents used for operating costs. However, an OCAF adjustment may not result in a contract rent that exceeds reasonable rent for comparable unassisted unit in the private market. The rent increase is effectuated via written notice from the contract administrator to the owner of the covered project, which constitutes an amendment of the rent specified in Exhibit A of the RAD PBV HAP contract. 4. When do I need to think about the OCAF? Prior to the anniversary of the RAD HAP contract. The OCAF is not automatically applied, even though it is the contract administrator's responsibility to apply the OCAF. An owner should make sure to request the OCAF within 60 days of the anniversary date. 5. Can a RAD-converted property receive OCAF adjustments for prior years which have not been taken on an annual basis? For example, a property converts through the RAD program in 2017 but has not applied for an OCAF adjustment since the conversion. In 2020, the property requests an OCAF adjustment. Is that property eligible to receive all of the OCAF adjustments since 2017, meaning 2018, 2019, and 2020? The answer is yes, and that the OCAF must be applied retroactively if it was missed, since the RAD PBV HAP contract gives the owner the right to contract rents adjusted by each year's OCAF. The contract administrator must make sure that all OCAFs have been applied correctly since the RAD closing and calculate the current rents accordingly, including making sure that the RAD PBV contract rents do not exceed the PBV program caps. If the contract administrator is also the project owner, then the calculations must be performed by an independent entity. Once the calculations have been made, the contract administrator must make a retroactive subsidy payment to the owner. 6. What else? HUD does not approve OCAF rent adjustments that PHAs make, but they may periodically review them to ensure accuracy. So, this means it is important to maintain good records to demonstrate how OCAFs were used to make rent adjustments, in case HUD requests a review. How do I apply the OCAF? Now that you know the basics of what an OCAF is, let's talk through the steps a PHA needs to take to apply the OCAF by use of an optional Excel-based tool that is available for download on the RAD Resource Desk. Because this is an optional tool, the results of the analysis are not required to be submitted to HUD. Also, because this is an optional tool, if the PHA or its independent entity prefers to use their own tool to adjust contract rents by the OCAF, they should do so. HUD recommends that PHAs retain a copy of the methodology used to adjust the RAD contract rents for audit purposes. If the RAD PBV property is PHA owned, pursuant to 24 CFR 983.59, the HUD-approved independent entity will need to verify the rent-setting calculations. Now, we will walk through an example scenario by use of the tool. The tool is organized into 3 steps. The cells that are shaded in orange, blue, and green need to be populated with information by the PHA or independent entity. The remaining cells are auto-calculated. Step 1. So, let's get started with Step 1. Enter information into the orange cells, beginning with the PHA name, project name, the current year, and the HAP anniversary date. For our scenario, we're looking at Sunnyside Village at the Ruppel Housing Authority. Then, come down to the table and enter in the number of RAD units by bedroom size in column B, the current RAD Section 8 PBV contract rents by bedroom size in column C, and the reasonable rents by bedroom size in column E. Please note that throughout this video, when we reference columns or rows, we are referring to letter labels within the tool, not the Excel sheet coordinates. If this is the first year that you are adjusting rents, the current RAD Section 8 PBV contract rents can be found in Exhibit A of the HAP contract. As you can see, after data are entered in columns B and C, column D automatically calculates the current monthly RAD Section 8 rent potential by bedroom size, column D, and for the property, row F. Next, head down to the blue cell, which asks for the number of non-RAD residential units in the property. If applicable, add the total number of non-RAD residential units at the property. If there are non-RAD units in the property, the total number of non-RAD units is entered in the row labeled G of the tool. For this example, there are 10 non-RAD units in Sunnyside Village, so we enter 10 in the blue box. Step 2. Now moving on to Step 2 of the calculation. Most of Step 2 is auto-calculated by the tool except for 3 fields. The 3 fields where you need to enter information are color-coded. They are blue, green, and orange. Row I is the annual RAD rent potential. This field shows Sunnyside Village's annual RAD rent potential. It is calculated using the information you entered about the RAD units in Step 1. Row J is the total annual rent potential for non-RAD units. This is also the first spot where you need to enter information. The tool requests entry of the total annual rent potential for the non-RAD units that were specified above in row G. Because this example property is a mix of RAD and non-RAD units, the total annual rent potential for non-RAD units would need to be entered here in the blue box. For this example, the total annual rent potential for non-RAD units is $120,000, which is the annual income for the 10 units you entered in row G. Row K is the total annual project rent potential for Sunnyside Village. This field is calculated by adding together row I and row J. Row L is the RAD percentage of the total project rent potential. This field is calculated by dividing the annual RAD rent potential by the total annual project rent potential. Row I is divided by row K to get this percentage. Next, head to the green cell, row M. This is the total annual hard debt service. Here you will enter the annual hard debt service if the property is carrying debt. If the property is not carrying debt, 0 would be entered here. In this example, Sunnyside Village's total annual hard debt service is $25,000. Next, move to row N, which is the RAD debt service share. Because Sunnyside Village is a mix of RAD and non-RAD units, the tool will calculate the RAD debt service share by multiplying the total annual debt service by the RAD percentage of total project rent potential. For this example, the RAD debt service share is calculated to be $24,417.59. This is 98% of the annual hard debt, identified as $25,000. Next, move to row O, which is the annual RAD rent potential less the RAD debt service. Here, the tool deducts the RAD debt service share from the annual RAD rent potential, identified in row I, to calculate the annual RAD rent potential less RAD debt service, identified in row O. Next, head over to the orange cell in row P. This is where you will enter in the OCAF amount based on the state in which the property is located. To find the OCAF amount for your applicable state, we need to open up the Federal Register website. Go to the Federal Register website and then search for the latest final notice from HUD about the OCAF. Be aware that HUD publishes two versions, one for comment and the final. The final version of the notice will include the table with OCAF rates, so look for that one. In this case, the most recent version was published on November 27, 2020, and has the 2021 OCAF amounts. Scroll down to the appendix, find your state, and then pull the OCAF rate that corresponds to your state. Sunnyside Village is in Louisiana, so we're going to use 2.2%. Now, let's walk through the information presented in rows Q through U. In row Q, we have the RAD rents less the debt service that now has the OCAF applied. Row R shows the adjusted RAD rent potential. This field adds the RAD debt service share to the RAD rents less debt service multiplied by the OCAF. For Sunnyside Village, this is $5,141,145. Row S calculates rent reasonableness. This field uses the numbers entered as reasonable rents by bedroom size in Step 1 to calculate Sunnyside Village's total annual potential using reasonable rents. For Sunnyside Village, this is $5,456,400. We want to give the owner the lower of the rent reasonableness or the adjusted RAD rent potential. Therefore, the tool selects the lower of the adjusted RAD rent potential with OCAF applied or rent reasonable total annual potential. For Sunnyside Village, $5,141,145 is less than $5,456,400. Therefore, row T is displaying $5,141,145, which is the adjusted RAD rent potential. In most cases, the adjusted RAD rent potential is going to be the lower of the two. This number is then used to calculate the increase factor. In row U, the tool calculates the increase factor. This is calculated by taking the percentage change in annual rental income and then comparing this year to the previous year. To get this percentage, the tool takes the difference between rows T and I, then divides it by row I. We get an increase factor of 2.19% for Sunnyside Village. This is important to note because you may think that you apply the OCAF directly to contract rents, but that is not the case. It is the increase factor that is applied to contract rents. The increase factor is different than the OCAF. The increase factor is calculated to account for the debt service and the portion of the property that is RAD. Step 3. Moving on to the final step, Step 3. The OCAF adjusted rents by bedroom type are identified in column Y. Note that the tool uses the auto-calculated increase factor to calculate the OCAF adjusted rent. In this example, the OCAF adjusted rent for a studio or zero-bedroom unit is $971, and the one-bedroom unit is $1,124, and the two-bedroom unit is $1,328. The tool also calculates the annual RAD adjusted rent, identified in column Z by bedroom type, and then for the full property down in row AA. Thank you for taking time to watch this video. Remember to visit the RAD Resource Desk to access and download this Excel-based tool.